Why tell a 5-year-old such nonsense? Ever since I remembered my 5th birthday, I've been asking myself this question, but I don't have an answer. I suppose I shouldn't be so surprised. Considering the other stories my grandmother told me when I was little, like Mr. Longfingers and The Secret of the Special Knock, I shouldn't be surprised at all. What follows is a memory of the day I turned 5. I must have repressed that day for years because it took me weeks of therapy to figure it out. Grandma, will you tell me a bedtime story? She was halfway to the bedroom door when my words stopped her. I didn't want her to go. Grandma had just put me to bed and turned off the lamp by the bed, and suddenly I felt scared. Partly it was the darkness of my bedroom. The shadows were so thick I could barely make out my stuffed animals lined up on my dresser. But mostly it was my new birthday present. My grandma had given me the present. It wasn't my main present. It was a package of monsters and my pocket toys that I'd ripped open at the bottom. Nope. It was an extra present. A secret present. I hated it. Even in the dark, I could see its dark shape on my nightstand. The thing gave me the creeps. A story? Well, what kind of story would you like to hear? It was a stupid question, because my grandma had only ever told me one story, a scary one. But since I was already a little scared, I said something I normally wouldn't have said. Nothing too scary, Grandma. Grandma raised her eyebrows. Not too scary? I shook my head. She leaned over and turned on my bedside lamp again, then sat at the foot of my bed. She smiled at me. Out of the corner of my eye, I could still see Grandma's gift. It was watching me from my bedside table. I tried to ignore it. Okay, Grandma said, settling herself in. I think I'll tell you a story about a witch. A long time ago, Grandma began, there lived a young woman in a little house by the sea. She had no worries. She went to school, drew, and in the evenings, she read adventure books by the fire. This girl lived with her mother and grandmother, and they were all very close. She loved her family very much. One day in early summer, the girl was walking home from school and met a boy on the path. She had never spoken to him before, but she got to know him well enough. He wore the same uniform as she did after all, and she guessed he must be a year ahead of her at school. "Where are you going?" the boy asked. His shirt was unbuttoned, and he was smoking a cigarette. The girl hesitated. Her mother had told her that cigarettes were bad for you. She had also told her never to talk to strangers on the way home from school. But then, the girl wondered, was this boy really a stranger? The principal of their school had said that they were all one big family. If this boy wore the same uniform as her, they couldn't really be strangers, could they? "I'm going home," the girl answered. "My house is on this path." The boy finished his cigarette, then threw it into the grass. He smiled at the girl. "Before you go home, would you like to see something cool?" he asked. The girl was curious, but she also knew that she couldn't be late. Her mother would be terribly worried if she was late. So she thanked the boy and told him that she had to go. But just as she passed him, he called out to her again. "It's a puppy," said the boy. "Our dog had puppies last week, and Daddy said I could keep one. He's in this old barn by my house. Don't you want to see the puppy?" Now the girl loved puppies. She had wanted a dog ever since she could remember, but her mother always said that they couldn't afford one. Right then, she would have given anything in the world to pet a cute little puppy. When she closed her eyes, she could just picture it. A happy little dog with a big pink tongue and a wagging tail. Eager to meet her, the girl stopped and looked down the path that led back to her house. She thought about her mother. Then she looked back at the boy who was smiling at her. What harm could there be, thought the girl, in taking a quick look? So the girl followed the boy, and he led her over a stile and across a great big field. And they walked and walked until the girl saw a great barn rising in the distance. And she was so excited that she walked as fast as she could, and the boy laughed and walked with her. It was only when they were right at the barn that the girl began to get nervous. It had taken longer to get there than she had thought, and the sun was much lower in the sky now. She was going to be late getting home. Her mother would be worried. She wanted to see the puppy so she could hurry back, but the barn was dark and full of shadows, and she could see no sign of him inside. "He's right there, behind you," the boy whispered, taking her hand and leading her into the shadows. "He'll be so glad to see you." So the girl took his hand and followed him, and even though his palm was sweaty, She held on tightly because she was suddenly beginning to feel afraid. It wasn't until she heard footsteps and laughter behind her and turned to see two big boys coming out of the shadows of the barn that the fear inside her turned to terror. When the little girl finally got home, the sun was setting over the ocean, and the sea was the color of blood. The little girl made it to the door of the little house before she collapsed in the hallway, sobbing. It was her grandmother who found her like this. The little girl's grandmother was very old and very wise. Her mother had told her that her grandmother had lived so long and seen so much that she knew all the secrets of the world. When she was little, the little girl had been afraid of her grandmother, but now the old lady took the young woman in her arms and comforted her. Told the little girl that her mother was working late and would not be home for a while. Told the little girl that she could tell her anything she wanted. And in the hallway of their little house, the little girl did just that. She told her grandmother about the boy and about the barn and about all the terrible things those big boys had done to her in the shadows. And her grandmother listened, and she became very still and still. "Come with me," she said. The girl had almost never been in her grandmother's room before. When she was little, she had always felt creepy. Her grandmother had lots of old scary pictures hanging on the walls and strange little statues and carvings on the shelves. But the moment her grandmother led her to an old wooden chair and sat her down, the girl hardly noticed them. Her grandmother spoke to her in a soothing voice, and all she could do was listen. She listened as her grandmother told her that she knew a trick to protect herself from evil, a trick to protect her from those horrible boys so that they could never hurt her again, so that she could control them. While the grandmother was talking, she took an old wooden box from the bottom of her closet and unlocked it. Inside the box were countless crocheted dolls. All the dolls were the same blank cream color, with no features except for their eyes. Each doll had a pair of eyes that seemed to follow the girl. When the grandmother pulled the three dolls out of the box, she closed her eyes. She began to whisper. The sound made the girl's skin itch, but it didn't last long. Soon the grandmother lined up the dolls on the carpet, and her eyes opened again. The last thing she pulled out of the box was a pair of black knitting needles and some yarn. "Those boys who hurt you, honey," she whispered. "I want you to describe them to me." And though she was still terrified, and though she felt sick, the girl did so. She described the boys as best she could remember. She described them while the grandmother worked with her knitting needles. And at last, as the blood-red sun disappeared behind the sea outside the cottage window, the dolls were finished. The girl's grandmother took the girl's hands and looked into her eyes. "I want you to hold these dolls, honey," she whispered. "As long as you have them, these boys will never be able to hurt you again. And you know what? These boys never did." The girl was sitting in a chair overlooking the sea when her grandmother burst through the cottage door. It had been 2 days since they had made the dolls, and for the first time since she had met the boy on the path, the girl felt calm again. She felt calm, but her grandmother clearly did not. When the girl turned away from the window and smiled in greeting, the old woman handed her a newspaper with shaking hands. "Three brothers tortured and killed in brutal mass murder," the headline read. "Agatha," her grandmother whispered. "Oh, Agatha, what have you done?" But the girl just kept smiling. She kept smiling as she took her grandmother's hand and led her upstairs to the bedroom. She kept smiling as she opened her little cupboard and took out a cardboard box. And when the old woman screamed in shock and horror at the three dolls inside, the girl continued to smile. "What have you done, Agatha?" the grandmother whispered again. But it was obvious what the girl had done. Each of the dolls had been pierced with at least a dozen sewing pins, all of which had been threaded through their crocheted heads. The area below the waist of each had been scorched by black flames. The girl smiled at her handiwork and took the grandmother's trembling hands in her own. "They won't hurt anyone now, will they?" she whispered. "See, honey?" Grandma said, getting up from my bed and turning off the light. "I gave you one with a happy ending." I lay there in the dark, feeling sick. I don't think I understood everything Grandma said, at least not then, but I understood enough. I understood enough to know that I was worse off now than I had been before the story began. "Granny, wait," I said, my voice stopping her in her tracks. "Aren't you Agatha?" Grandma looked back at me and smiled. She came over and leaned down, kissing my forehead. "Time for bed, Christopher," she whispered. "And remember, the gift I bought for you will always be there if you need it." She stood up and walked out of my bedroom. I watched her go, but after a few moments, my gaze fell again on the gift on my bedside table. A knitted doll. She was looking straight at me, her face featureless except for two empty, staring eyes.